My name is James Parker. Some would say I'm a simple man, though I've had my share of challenges along the way. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, where life wasn't exactly handed to you on a silver platter, taught me resilience. Hard work was all I knew, and it's what pulled me up, helping me build a life I could be proud of. I started small, vending machines, a coin-changing business, a few rental properties. Just honest work. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Then came Natalie. We've been together over 15 years now. I met her right around the time things started to go well for me, back when I thought I had everything figured out. She was smart, beautiful, full of ideas, and she could hold her own. I respected that about her, the way she'd argue her point and push me to be better. She was everything I never thought I'd find in someone else. She wasn't just a partner. She was someone I admired. Our life, our little home in Oak Forest, it's simple. We live comfortably. No need for flashy cars or fancy vacations. I'll admit, though, it was never just about what we had. It was the life we built together, the late-night talks, the weekend spent on home projects, getting to know the neighbors. Natalie and we built a life based on trust, a partnership. That's something I took pride in. I supported her career when she wanted to start working as a paralegal, always telling her I was behind her 100%. After all, that's what a marriage should be, right? Then there's Emily. My little girl, though at her age, she'd roll her eyes hearing that. She's the heartbeat of our family, the one who always makes things feel light. She's grown so much so fast. These days, we're inseparable. We go to local fairs, watch ball games together, you name it. Nothing made me happier than watching her grow up, her mother by my side, thinking we had everything we needed. But something shifted like a small crack in a window that you barely notice at first. Natalie started a new job at this high-end law firm, and, well, I noticed some changes. At first, I brushed them off. She was busier, more stressed out, working late. I didn't mind that part. I know how jobs can be. But she seemed more distant, spent more time in front of the mirror, buying new clothes. She'd be texting more often, even at dinner, which wasn't like her. I'd tell myself, she's just busy. Or maybe it's just part of the job. But then she'd mention these new friends at the firm, start going to these work dinners. Her tone would change, like she was in another world, like I wasn't part of it anymore. She'd get home late sometimes, saying the hours were long. And her clothes, new, expensive suits and dresses. I'd tease her, asking if we'd won the lottery without my knowing, but she'd just laugh it off and say, "Don't worry, it's work-related." I chose to believe her. One evening, I walked into the living room and saw her laughing at her phone. She quickly turned it off when she saw me and gave me a forced smile. Now, I'm not the paranoid type, but something about that moment lingered with me. She used to show me what made her laugh, share little things from her day. But that was gone, replaced by hurried explanations and quick dismissals. Maybe it's my upbringing, that side of me that doesn't want to jump to conclusions. You're just tired, I'd tell myself. Natalie's just finding herself in this new job. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that we were still solid. So I kept quiet, kept telling myself she'd come around, that it was just a phase. But deep down, I knew something was different. After Natalie started her new job, things felt different. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. But pretty soon, it was impossible to ignore. She was spending more time in front of the mirror, putting on makeup just to go to work. Now, I know my wife. She never used to care much about appearances outside of special occasions. So it struck me as odd that she suddenly needed designer clothes and perfume to spend the day at the office. Then there were the late nights. She'd say she was out with colleagues, but she'd come home hours after the usual dinner hour, smelling like some fancy wine. When I asked about it, she'd wave me off with some excuse about networking and needing to impress her superiors. The way she brushed me off, that was new. And, frankly, I didn't appreciate it. Must be a pretty fancy office dinner to be out that late, I'd say, letting her know I wasn't buying the story. She'd just laugh it off. "It's just work, James. Don't get so serious." That got me wondering, if it was just work, why did she care more about looking good for her office than for her own family? The changes didn't stop there. Suddenly, she was glued to her phone. It used to sit on the kitchen counter while she went about her business. Now, it was always in her hand or tucked away, and I noticed she'd put a passcode on it. She'd turn the screen face down if I walked by, like she was hiding something. Now, I'm no fool, and I'm not one to play the role of suspicious husband, but I couldn't ignore it. So, one night I confronted her. Not in a yelling match, but straight and to the point. "What's with the phone, Natalie?" I asked. "You've never been so private about it before." She didn't skip a beat. "Oh, it's just because work has us dealing with some private information. Security stuff, you know?" I gave her a nod, but kept my eyes on her. "Right? I didn't realize you were handling confidential matters as a paralegal." Her smile slipped just a bit before she caught herself, and she went back to the usual, "Don't worry, James," but that answer didn't sit right with me. I knew Natalie well enough to see she wasn't being honest. The finances, too, started looking odd. I handle most of the bills, so I noticed right away when charges started popping up for high-end restaurants. There were charges from places in downtown Chicago that I knew weren't just office meals. And then there were the spa charges, luxury places with prices I'd never seen her spend before. She'd say, "It's just something the girls at work do once in a while. Don't overthink it." So one evening, when we were alone, I brought it up. "Care to explain why our card is paying for fine dining and fancy spa treatments?" She barely looked up, shrugging like it was nothing. "Relax, James. It's just a dinner with my boss and colleagues and a spa day with the girls. What's the big deal?" I leaned forward, not letting it slide. Funny, because I thought we were the kind of couple that talked about this kind of stuff. I could see she wasn't expecting me to press. Her answers grew more clipped, like she didn't feel like explaining herself to me. And I'll tell you, that reaction only raised my hackles further. After all these years, I didn't like the idea that I was being kept in the dark, especially by my own wife. Then came the family events. We had a tradition every Sunday evening to have dinner together, just the three of us. But Natalie started skipping out, claiming she needed to catch up on work. Emily noticed, asking why Mom's always working now. I didn't have an answer for her, and that just added fuel to the fire building in my chest. The final straw came one Friday night. Natalie had been distant all week, distracted. She told me she had a team dinner that evening and not to wait up for her. But when she came home, late again, I noticed her tossing something in the trash. I waited until she was in bed, then went to check. Sure enough, there was a receipt crumpled at the bottom. It was from a restaurant, a pricey place downtown where we'd once celebrated an anniversary. She'd been there tonight, all right, and she'd been there with someone, that much was clear. When she came to bed, I didn't bring it up right away. I was still processing the anger, and I knew that saying something right then wouldn't get me anywhere. But I couldn't let it slide. I looked over at her, lying next to me, and all I could think was, what else has she been hiding? I was raised to stand up for what's right and be a good husband, but I wasn't about to ignore signs staring me in the face. If Natalie thought she could keep stringing me along, she'd have another thing coming. After that night, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Natalie had been lying to my face, slipping away with flimsy excuses about work, while something far worse was clearly going on. So, I did what any man who values the truth would do. I took matters into my own hands. I didn't enjoy the idea of tracking her location. It wasn't exactly my style to spy on anyone, let alone my own wife. But Natalie had crossed lines I thought were sacred, so if she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. I installed a tracking app on her phone, determined to see just how far this had gone. The first time I checked her location, she was supposed to be at another team dinner. But when I opened the app, I saw her location blip moving across town. Nowhere near her office, nowhere near any place she'd normally be. Her dot stopped at a high-end cocktail bar downtown, the kind of place where people go to impress, to flaunt. I clenched my jaw, watching that little dot on the screen like it was the last thread holding me together. When she got home that night, I waited for her to admit it, to say something honest for once. She walked in, her makeup flawless, smelling like some cologne I didn't recognize. She gave me the usual, dinner ran late, like she was reading off a script. I let her go to bed without a word. But the truth was I knew everything I needed to know. She was out there, hiding her life from me, and then waltzing in like I was some fool waiting up for her. The next piece of proof came one evening a few days later, when I overheard her talking in the kitchen. She didn't see me come in as she was leaning against the counter, laughing in that flirtatious tone I hadn't heard in years. "Stop it," she whispered into her phone. "You're too much. I can't wait either." I slammed the door behind me. She jumped, quickly turning off her phone, a guilty look flickering across her face before she forced a smile. "Who was that?" I asked, not bothering to hide the steel in my voice. "Oh, just a friend from work," she said, shrugging it off like it was nothing. "A friend," I repeated, my voice low. "Since when do friends make you giggle like a teenager?" Her eyes darted around the room as she muttered something about me being paranoid, and she brushed past me without another word. Paranoid. She had the nerve to call me paranoid when she was the one hiding everything from me. I let her walk away that night, but the anger simmered inside me, building to something I knew I couldn't ignore. The following day, I decided to dig deeper. When she was in the shower, I went to her bag, rooting around the bottom until I found it, a second phone. A cheap burner phone hidden away under her makeup, like she was some high schooler hiding her secrets from her parents. I opened it up, and there it was, text from someone named Ethan. I read enough to know what was going on. There were messages about how amazing their last night was, about how they couldn't wait to meet again. Each word was like a punch to the gut, but it also ignited something in me. I wasn't hurt anymore. No, I was furious. Natalie thought she could sneak around with some kid from work and get away with it. She thought I wouldn't catch on. I put the phone back, taking a long breath. She didn't know it yet, but she'd crossed a line you don't cross with me. Later, I called my best friend Tom. Tom had always been someone I could count on, someone who told it to me straight. When I told him everything, he was as silent as I'd ever heard him, just letting me get it all out. Finally, he cleared his throat. "James, you've given her everything, and this is how she repays you? Lying, sneaking around with some boy from her office." "Yeah," I replied, the anger steady and controlled. "It's time I show her who she's dealing with." Tom let out a long breath. "Well, I think you know what needs to be done. She messed with the wrong man." For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. I'd been through enough. She'd chosen to throw away 15 years, and she'd done it without a second thought. Now, it was my turn to show her that betrayal doesn't go unnoticed. I spent the next few days preparing for this moment. The lies, the sneaking around, Natalie thought she could keep me in the dark. Well, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. I had everything ready. The texts, the location logs, and every little detail that proved exactly where she'd been and who she'd been with. I wanted her to know that I knew it all. I waited until a Friday night. Emily was out with friends, and it was just Natalie and me at home. She walked in around her usual time, nearly midnight, acting as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But when she saw me sitting there, waiting, her smile faltered. She must have noticed something in my face because she stopped short, a flicker of something. Maybe guilt? Crossing her expression. "Long night?" I asked, my voice flat. She gave me a tight smile. "Work dinner, you know how it is." "Oh, I do," I said, nodding. "But I don't think that's what tonight was, Natalie." She looked at me, confused, maybe even a little irritated. "James, what are you talking about? You're not starting with the paranoia thing again, are you?" Paranoia. She really had the audacity to throw that word at me again, even after all the evidence I had. I stood up, keeping my gaze steady on her. "Tell me the truth, Natalie. Where were you tonight?" She hesitated, that confident mask starting to slip just a little. "I told you it was a work dinner. Why are you acting like this?" I felt a surge of anger. "Acting like this? Natalie, I know about the phone. I know about Ethan. I know exactly where you've been sneaking off to." For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, her face draining of color. But then, she pulled herself together, forcing out a laugh. "You've got to be kidding. Ethan is just a coworker. We're friends, that's all." I took a deep breath, holding up her second phone. "Friends don't have burner phones hidden in their bags, Natalie. Friends don't send messages about last night being amazing. So cut the lies. I want the truth." Her face hardened, and I saw something in her I hadn't seen before, a defiance, a coldness. "Fine," she snapped, folding her arms across her chest. "Yes, I've been seeing someone. But you know what, James? Maybe if you'd been a little more exciting, a little less predictable, things wouldn't have gotten this far." Her words hit me like a punch, but I held my ground. "Predictable? You mean reliable, supportive? The man who helped you build this life. "Oh, don't give me that speech," she sneered. "You and your little routines, your idea of settling down. Maybe I wanted more. Maybe I wanted someone who didn't make me feel like I was settling." I shook my head, feeling a cold anger settle over me. "So that's your excuse? After 15 years, that's all you've got?" She shrugged, looking away as if she was already tired of the conversation. "I don't owe you an explanation, James." I felt a new level of anger rising. "No, Natalie, you owe me everything. 15 years of marriage, of loyalty, of building a life together. And you throw it all away for what? Some thrill with a kid from your office?" Her expression softened for a brief moment, and I thought I saw a hint of regret. But she quickly masked it, lifting her chin defiantly. "I didn't plan for it to happen. It just did. And maybe it's for the best." "For the best?" I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. "You honestly believe this is what's best for our family?" "For Emily." At the mention of Emily, I saw her flinch. "Don't bring her into this, James. This is between us." "No, Natalie, it's not just between us. It's about the family we built, the daughter who trusts you. She deserves better than a mother who sneaks around with another man." She was silent, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, I almost thought she might apologize, that she'd see the damage she'd done. But instead, she straightened up, her face hardening again. "Maybe it's time we think about what we really want, James. Because I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time." I felt my stomach turn. "You weren't happy, so you decided to betray me? Without a word? Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To our family?" She sighed, like she was tired of my questions, tired of the conversation altogether. "Look, maybe it's best if we separate. Maybe this marriage was never what either of us wanted." I took a long, hard look at her, feeling an anger so deep it was almost cold. "You know what, Natalie? Maybe you're right. Maybe we should call it quits. But don't think for a second that you'll get to walk away from this without facing the consequences." Her eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or just surprise at how serious I was. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned in close, keeping my voice low and controlled. "It means you've made your choice, and you're going to regret it." She swallowed but said nothing, her face pale as I walked away. She knew I wasn't going to let her get away with this. Not after everything she'd done. And now, she was about to find out exactly what I was capable of. When I finally made the decision to let Natalie feel the weight of her own choices, I wanted to make sure she would understand exactly what her betrayal cost her. She'd taken my loyalty for granted, but I wasn't the type to stand around and let that slide. I'd supported her career, her dreams, her lifestyle. She had built herself up on my hard work and trust, and now she'd see just how much she needed me. The first thing I did was lock down the finances. Years ago, Natalie had insisted on merging our accounts, claiming that shared finances meant shared trust. Ironically, it was that same shared setup that would make her life very difficult now. Over the next few days, I removed her access to every account tied to my income. I contacted the bank, canceled her credit cards, and rerouted our savings into a private account she couldn't touch. The small business assets, vending machines, rental income, and other investments were all in my name alone, and now she'd feel the pinch. I also began moving larger chunks of money into investment accounts under my own name, securing funds that she'd never see. Natalie may have expected a comfortable separation, but what she got was an empty wallet and a reality check. A few days after the money moved, she stormed over to my place, looking livid. She stood on my porch, arms crossed, and knocked hard enough to wake the neighbors. When I opened the door, her face was a mixture of anger and shock. "James," she snapped, "what did you do to our accounts?" I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my voice calm. "Just securing my assets. You walked out of this marriage. Why should I keep paying your way?" Her expression twisted, and she stammered. "But you can't just leave me with nothing. I've given years to this family. Years of taking from this family." I corrected her. "Now it's time you manage on your own, just like you wanted." She looked stunned, but had no response. As she left, I felt a sense of satisfaction that was worth more than any money. I was only getting started, but the money alone wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the consequences in every part of her life. So, I came up with a few more inconveniences. First, I called in a favor from an old friend who owned a cash services company. The next monthly spousal support payment would arrive in heavy sacks of coins. It was perfectly legal, but an absolute nightmare for her to manage. The morning they arrived, I could just picture her face when she saw the bags of coins stacked on her front lawn. That was my little contribution to her day's exercise. Still, I couldn't resist keeping an eye on the aftermath. The next time I spoke with one of our neighbors, I casually brought up the unusual delivery I'd arranged. I didn't need to reveal details. My neighbor's eyes lit up with enough curiosity to guarantee the story would spread. Soon enough, Natalie wouldn't just be dealing with financial strain. She'd also have the humiliation of rumors circulating about her. However, just as I was getting comfortable with my progress, I received a surprise twist myself. That same week, Natalie's lawyer contacted me with a letter demanding a full financial accounting of our assets, including evidence for every penny I'd withdrawn. Apparently, she hadn't given up the fight yet. But I was ready for this. I kept copies of every transfer, every expense, and had a record to back it up. Let her dig. I'd been careful. As I began working on the legal documents, an unexpected opportunity arose. My attorney called, letting me know that Natalie's law firm was under investigation for client misconduct and tax evasion. I hadn't known how deep the problems ran, but if Natalie's bosses were in trouble, it was likely her job was hanging by a thread too. And I was ready to push that thread. A few days later, I anonymously provided a list of relevant contacts and leads to the investigators, letting them know who to talk to at Natalie's firm. It wasn't long before rumors started spreading around town that her job might be in jeopardy. She'd built a reputation as the reliable, capable paralegal. If her career unraveled, she'd feel the blow just as much as she had with the money. In the meantime, I wanted to make sure our daughter Emily was insulated from the fallout. I wasn't about to drag her into our mess, but I wasn't going to leave her at Natalie's mercy either. I opened a private bank account in Emily's name, setting aside funds that only she could access once she turned 18. This was money Natalie would never be able to touch. Emily had seen her mother's behavior change, too. I could tell she was confused by it all. I sat down with her one evening and explained, gently, that her mom and I were going through some tough changes. I didn't badmouth Natalie, but I made it clear she could always depend on me, no matter what. Emily deserved stability, and I'd make sure she had it. While I was busy setting things up, Natalie started showing signs of desperation. The rumors about her job and the difficulties accessing money were taking a toll. She started calling me, first leaving polite voicemails, then more desperate ones. One evening, she even showed up at my place unannounced, her face drawn and tired. "James," she started, "we can fix this. I know things got complicated, but maybe we don't have to go through all this. We've been together too long to just throw it all away." I looked at her, trying to see the woman I once loved. But all I saw was the woman who'd betrayed me, who thought she could have her cake and eat it too. "Fix this?" I asked, shaking my head. "After everything you did? You made your choices, Natalie. Now you're dealing with them." She shifted, crossing her arms defensively. "Don't act like this is all my fault. You were always so wrapped up in your businesses. Maybe if you'd given me more attention, I wouldn't have felt so." "Stop right there," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I gave you everything you could have asked for. You're the one who turned your back on it." Her expression hardened, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. Without another word, she turned and left, leaving me standing in my doorway, feeling a mix of satisfaction and a strange calm. She could throw her excuses around all she wanted, but we both knew the truth. Over the next few weeks, things only got worse for her. The investigation into her firm hit the local papers, and people started distancing themselves from her. Our mutual friends began dropping by less frequently, and when they didn't bother asking how Natalie was doing. Our neighbors stopped waving as warmly, and even Emily's friends' parents seemed more cautious around her. One final opportunity arose that sealed the deal. I found out through a mutual acquaintance that Natalie's Ethan had been spotted out with someone else, a younger, new hire at the firm. Turned out, Natalie wasn't his only work friend. The irony didn't escape me, but But I wasn't surprised. It seemed she wasn't as special to him as she'd thought. A few days later, I caught a glimpse of her in town, looking haggard and defeated. Her clothes, once sharp and expensive, looked worn, and the confident posture I'd known was gone. She'd thrown away everything we'd built, and now she was finally feeling the consequences. I'd expected to feel a rush of vindication, maybe even anger. But instead, I felt a deep, steady satisfaction. The kind that comes from knowing you've done right by yourself, by the life you built, and by the people who truly mattered. As the fallout of our separation unfolded, I settled into a routine of sorts. For the first time in years, I could breathe a little easier. Natalie was still grasping for any remaining threads of her old life, but she was finding fewer and fewer. She was fighting an uphill battle she wasn't prepared for, especially without my support to prop her up. My choices had placed her in a tight spot financially, socially, and professionally, and she was feeling the weight of that reality more each day. But then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. The scandal at Natalie's law firm escalated. The whispers and rumors that had been circulating turned into a full-blown investigation, and it seemed her firm's issues were worse than anyone had imagined. Fraud, unethical dealings, and even tax evasion. All these accusations came to light. The investigators dug deep, looking at everyone from the top down, and Natalie, as one of the senior paralegals who'd handled many clients' files, was now more involved than I'd initially realized. I hadn't planned for her to be directly implicated in the firm's troubles, but fate had a way of delivering justice. The firm's involvement in illegal activities wasn't just a small scandal. It became a public matter. Our town's local newspaper picked up the story, and before long, the larger city papers were running articles about it too. Natalie's name, once respected and admired, was now associated with a failing, corrupt law firm. I remember when she showed up at my door, desperate and disheveled, looking as if she'd barely slept. She had tears in her eyes, her confident exterior completely gone. It was a look I'd never seen on her, and for a brief moment I almost felt pity. Almost. "James," she said, her voice shaking. "They're saying I might lose my job, that I might even face legal trouble because of what's happening at the firm. You have to help me. This is getting out of hand." I raised an eyebrow, my expression cool. "Help you? After everything?" Her face crumpled, and she reached out as if to touch my hand. "I made a mistake, James. I know that now. I was wrong, but I don't deserve this. You have to understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I replied, pulling my hand away. "You're seeing the consequences of your choices, Natalie. I warned you there'd be fallout, but you chose this path." She tried to explain herself, stammering through excuses and half-hearted apologies. She even went so far as to suggest that if I helped her get through this, we could rebuild our relationship, try to be a family again. But as I listened to her pleas, I felt nothing but the cold realization that this woman would have torn me down if she could have gotten away with it. "You don't get it, do you?" I finally said, cutting her off. "This isn't about you losing a job or facing a scandal. This is about trust. You broke it, Natalie. You walked away from everything we built, and you thought there wouldn't be a price to pay. Well, now you're paying it." Her face fell, and she looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "James, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Please." I shook my head. "It's too late. Maybe one day you'll understand the damage you did. But as for me, I'm done. You wanted freedom? Well, you have it, just not the way you expect it." I closed the door, leaving her on the doorstep with nothing but her guilt and the crumbling remains of her life. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The following weeks brought even more clarity to me. Emily, having noticed the growing distance between her mother and me, had been quiet through much of the ordeal. I hadn't given her the details, but she was sharp, and she'd pieced together that things weren't as simple as they seemed. She approached me one evening, her face serious, as she asked about her mother. "Dad, is Mom in trouble?" I sighed, considering how best to answer. "Your mom's going through a lot right now, honey. She made some choices that put her in a difficult position. But no matter what, I'll always be here for you." She nodded, processing my words. "Are you still angry with her?" I paused. "I don't think I'm angry anymore, Em. I just feel disappointed. But it's my job to make sure you have everything you need, and that hasn't changed." She hugged me, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Emily's quiet strength reminded me of what truly mattered. My focus now was on being the best father I could be, showing her that stability and loyalty were values worth holding on to. And in a way, that conversation was the final seal. Natalie's betrayal no longer had any power over me, because I'd regained my peace of mind. Around this time, an old friend of mine, Sarah, reached out. We'd known each other back in high school, but life had taken us in different directions. She'd recently moved back to town to start a small counseling practice. Sarah had heard about my separation and offered an ear if I ever needed to talk. I wasn't one to pour out my feelings, but something about reconnecting with an old friend felt like a chance to heal. We met for coffee a few times, talking about everything from old memories to the challenges of moving forward after a betrayal. Sarah had a way of listening that was both calming and grounding. She'd been through her own struggles and understood the weight of what I'd been carrying. Her support helped me see the situation in a new light, that Natalie's actions were a reflection of her own weaknesses, not mine. I'd stayed true to myself, and that was something to be proud of. Meanwhile, Natalie's life continued to unravel. The investigation at her firm intensified, and rumors circulated that she'd been complicit in handling certain confidential files that were now under scrutiny. Her boss and several of her colleagues were forced to resign, and Natalie found herself facing the same pressure. Even if she wasn't directly responsible for the firm's misconduct, her association with them had tainted her professional reputation. The final blow came when Ethan, the man she'd risked everything for, cut ties with her. Apparently, he'd started seeing someone else, a young associate at the firm, no less, and had no intention of helping Natalie pick up the pieces. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man she'd thrown away her family for had left her just as quickly as he'd come into her life. One evening, I received an email from her, a lengthy letter filled with apologies, regrets, and self-pity. She spoke about feeling lost, of realizing she'd thrown away everything for a fleeting thrill. She begged for forgiveness, for another chance to make things right. But as I read through her words, I felt none of the bitterness that had once consumed me. All I felt was a quiet indifference. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with them. In my reply, I kept it brief and to the point. I told her that while I accepted her apology, I had no interest in rekindling any form of relationship. I made it clear that my priority was Emily, and that I would continue to be a stable presence in her life. As for Natalie, she was on her own. With Natalie's chapter behind me, I focused on rebuilding my own life. Sarah and I continued to see each other, our friendship slowly growing into something more. She understood my past, respected my boundaries, and reminded me that trust could be rebuilt one step at a time. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace and hope. As the days passed, I looked back on the journey with a mixture of pride and resilience. Natalie's choices had hurt, yes, but they hadn't broken me. I'd come out stronger, clearer in my values, and more dedicated than ever to being a good father and a better man. In the end, justice had come in ways I hadn't anticipated. Natalie had been left with nothing but the consequences of her own actions, while I had found a new beginning built on trust, honesty, and hard-won wisdom. And as I stood on the other side of that storm, I knew I'd come through it all a better man. In the end, walking away from Natalie wasn't just about revenge or proving a point. It was about reclaiming my own life, finding peace in knowing that I'd done what was right for myself and for Emily. I'd let go of the anger, the bitterness, the need to make Natalie understand what she'd lost. She was already living with the weight of her own choices, and that was all the justice I needed. Emily and I grew closer in the months that followed. She saw a new side of me, one that was more open and willing to share my own struggles and thoughts with her. She'd watched me stand strong, even when things were at their worst, and I could tell it brought her comfort. I made a commitment to always be there for her, to show her what it meant to live with integrity and resilience. Then there was Sarah. What started as an old friendship rekindled became something deeper, something based on understanding, mutual respect, and a quiet companionship I hadn't known I was missing. She'd been a rock, helping me process everything without ever pushing me for more than I was ready to give. Being with her was easy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let down my guard. She'd seen me through my worst, and now she was helping me find my best. Looking back on everything that happened, I can see the lessons that were hidden in the pain. I learned that loyalty and respect are worth more than anything money or status could ever buy. I learned that facing betrayal isn't about tearing the other person down. It's about building yourself back up. I learned the value of having people in your life who stand by you through thick and thin, people who are there for you not because of what they gain, but because they truly care. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone facing betrayal, it's this: hold your ground, stay true to yourself, and never lose sight of your own worth. Don't let someone else's choices define your life. Let them face their own consequences while you focus on rebuilding yours. As for me, I've moved forward, wiser and stronger, with a life I can feel proud of. And though the road to get here wasn't easy, I wouldn't change a single step.